Part 3 of Wow, He Said. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I'm Gio, and let's have some fun. Sunrise. I stood at the shoreline and looked out at one of the Vermilion Lakes in Banff National Park. Banff is on the far western side of Canada, and it is so big it includes Vancouver Island and much of the coastline. Located east of Calgary, near the city called Banff, it is a spectacular place to watch the morning sun. The clouds were fire, the air crisp and chill, our breaths making little clouds of condensation. The clear lake reflected the gold and orange sky with flicks of crimson along some of the clouds. Mount Norquay towered nearby, already topped with the whiteness of snow. Save for a couple of tiny ripples on the water, the place was quiet. "The mountains are magnificent," I said, interrupting the stillness and taking hold of Derrik's warm hand. "Better than I remembered," Derrik said. We had been touring Canada for the last 3 weeks, starting in Toronto and eventually arriving here. The sunrise deepened, and the clouds changed from gold to orange and scarlet, then a deep red. Spellbound, the two of us could only watch as the beauty filled our souls. I'm Rodney Tollum, age 22, and this is the reason I live on the back of my Kawasaki Vulcan S, a 2-year-old motorcycle with black saddlebags and a lot of miles on her. Originally, I'm from Connecticut. My parents are richer than rich. Arthur, my dad, is running for governor. I'd come out to Mom and Dad just weeks ago, and it might have ruined the race for him. What do I do for a living? I am the co-owner of Moses and Rodney Sell the World, an internet store that specializes in collectibles, and I do most of the website design and computer work, while Moses and his family handle shipping and sales. As long as I have an internet connection, I can work anywhere. Derrik, almost 22, is my boyfriend. We're about the same height, but he has blonde short hair, cut cute and stylish. He can't grow a beard, but the scruff on his chin looked sexy. We went from dance partners to acquaintances to pretend boyfriends to friends to traveling companions to real boyfriends and finally to real fiancés in a week. We met at the steakhouse in Dead Man's Butte down in Nevada. Where is Dead Man's Butte? About an hour north of Las Vegas. He's a college student that got very disillusioned with life. Blame that on his stalker boyfriend, Ash, who's 35, and Derrik's overprotective parents. Ash is an obsessive hockey fan, and obsessive about Derrik. Derrik has learned to hate the guy, especially after he ambushed us at the Eaton Center in Toronto. We think Derrik's mom and dad planned the ambush. Ash shouldn't be bothering us again. He has his own issues, like bringing a knife and threatening people with it, namely me. One crescent kick took him down. The Toronto authorities have him now. Living life driving on a motorcycle all around the USA, and now Canada, isn't for everyone, but Derrik seems to be enjoying it. My home is my bike is my home. Derrik understands this, or at least I hope he does, because I've grown to really love him over the last few weeks. What started as a set of new friends traveling across America turned into something deep and beautiful. Love at first sight is only a myth, but it happened to us. Something creaked out on the water, and some soft conversation drifted to us. A small boat rowed deeper into the lake, and a couple of old men cast their lines into the water. "That could be us," Derrik said, "in 50 years. Derrik is a college student from New Bedford, a suburb of Toronto, 2,100 miles away. He hasn't figured out what he wants to do with his life, except travel with me. I like riding with him. He's easy to talk with, and we simply gel with each other. We're boyfriends, but not lovers. Every time I kissed him, it is a wow. Like right now, under the incredible scarlet skies, I kissed him. Wow. Soon we'd travel to the States, where it's warmer. No offense, but Canada gets cold at night. We spent a few more minutes before Derrik said, "Let's go find a diner and get some coffee." It only took 15 minutes to backtrack a little and find a bagel shop open for business. We stopped inside, sat, and I had a bagel breakfast sandwich made with an Asiago cheese bagel, with cheese and egg and some kind of maple-cured ham. Derrik had an omelet with everything stuffed inside an onion bagel. We talked, took out our phones, and planned which direction to go. Because it was getting cold, we both decided it was time to head south. "Let's go visit your grandparents," Derrik said. My grandparents on my mom's side are both dead. My grandparents on my dad's side, whom I haven't seen in a decade, live in New Mexico, I said. "Any ideas on how to find them?" "I've seen mine almost every holiday," Derrik said. "At the very least, we video chatted." "Dad wouldn't allow that," I said. "My folks won't even give me my grandparents' phone number or address. How can I find them?" "Let's see if they have a Facebook. Give me the laptop. What are their names? Where do they live?" Derrik asked. I handed him the laptop and said, "Roderico and Madeline Tullum. Since Dad is 61, they'd have to be in their 80s, and they live around Taos, New Mexico." "What else do you remember?" Derrik asked. I thought a moment and said, "I remember an old home with a cement porch and large windows and lots of religious statues out front. It was kind of a light brown color, but that could have changed. I remember 2 aunts and an uncle. Nearby I had grandaunts and granduncles and their kids and their kids' kids. Dad was the second oldest child of my grandparents. I had about 50 cousins, if you include all the first cousins and second cousins, plus the second aunts and the second uncles, and oh my gosh, it was a huge family. I remember my Aunt Maggie being way into genealogy, and she kept the family together." "That's a really big family," Derrik said, typing away. "But your parents only had 1 kid and stayed away. Do you know why the no contact?" I shook my head and said, "Only theories. I assumed it had to do with money. Dad and Mom avoided talking about Dad's family. I remember Aunt Maggie. She used to make the best caramels, and she always gave me some." A couple of minutes later, Derrik looked at me and said, "Tullum is not that common of a name. It's more noted as a place in Mexico. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people with that name, but it's nothing like Wang or Smith." "Did you find anything?" I asked. With that, Derrik smiled and turned the laptop around. "What you gave me narrowed it down. Check it out." An unrestricted Facebook page for the Tullum family. I opened up pictures and saw people I vaguely remembered, and the house, now painted white, with a group photo of my grandparents, a woman I assumed was my great-grandmother, my aunts and uncles and spouses, and a lot of my cousins and their spouses and their kids. It included a middle-aged man in a priest's collar. There were a couple of side pictures of people who were in the military or couldn't make it for the picture for some reason. It must have been professionally taken to fit so many people in it. The only people that weren't in it were my parents and me. Mom and Dad had isolated me from this whole part of my family, and it was a big part. Dumbfounded and a little bit angry, I clicked through the feed. It had messages from everywhere. This must be the common family page with news about everybody in the family. It had news about who was in the hospital and how they were doing, and new families and their babies, who was getting married, whose birthdays were coming up, even special family events like anniversaries. I'd never had my grandparents' phone number. My folks never gave it to me. I vaguely remembered where they lived, or used to live. It was more of a hope that I could find them. All I knew was that they lived on the outskirts of Taos. Would my grandparents even know me after all this time? Not with a family this big. Still, I took the laptop from Derrik and posted a short message into the feed. Hi, you won't remember me, but I'm Rodney Tollum, son of Arthur Tollum. It's been a decade since I've seen any of you. Me and my boyfriend, Derrik, would like to stop by for a visit sometime soon. After letting Derrik read it, I sent it. They would think me some random nut job. From Banff National Park, we traveled down to Washington along the I-5 and more or less followed the coast, driving through Seattle. We took our lunch to Pioneer Square and visited a couple dozen shops, including a leather store. I bought us matching black leather jackets. In Portland, we toured the Portland Japanese Gardens and had to stop at Powell's bookstore. The place was enormous. Then we sort of took a detour and traveled to the rolling streets of San Francisco. Of course, Derrik sent a postcard to his parents from each city we visited. I'd been to the city by the bay before, but Derrik hadn't. We wandered around Fisherman's Wharf, took pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge, and spent a day in the Mission District. Every morning in our motel room, I spent a couple of hours working on the website for mine and Moses' online collectible store. Moses and Rodney Sell the World. Derrik had some fun ideas about new ways to present some of the recently released action figures. I checked my Facebook. Nobody had responded to the Facebook message. What did I expect? From San Francisco, we traveled eastward and entered Nevada. It was 570 miles to Dead Man's Butte, an all-day journey that extended to 2 since we made many stops. I tried calling my parents to see if they would tell me how to contact my grandparents, give me a phone number or an address or something. Instead, Mom shouted, "You expect me to do anything for you? After the way you made us look on national TV, you made us look like fools, and your dad dropped his lead overnight. In fact, he's a little behind. This is all your fault. You are as selfish as your Uncle Bartholomew. Why couldn't you do this little thing for us?" I should have expected her to rant. It stung, and for a moment I felt like a failure. And then I saw the bright side. "It's called lying, Mom." "Wait, Bartholomew? That's the name of my uncle?" I said. Mom actually screamed something at me. I couldn't understand her. She immediately closed the connection. "What was that all about?" Derrik asked. I looked at the phone, somewhat confused, and said, "She's blaming me for Dad losing in the polls." Derrik pulled up the large family picture. It took a minute, but we found Bartholomew, the man in the priest's collar. On the long strips of highway, I let Derrik drive, and I held him. Every day, he became more comfortable driving the bike, and every day, I loved this man more and more. Only one thing bothered me. Derrik seemed nervous to go back to Dead Man's Butte, that small town where he had spent 6 months or so living with Ash. I couldn't blame him. I promised we'd make it quick. I asked him if he had anything to pick up at his and Ash's old place, and Derrik said anything he left there could be replaced. He wasn't stepping inside. Ever. We drove past the apartment complex, and Derrik tensed. Ash's car was parked in the driveway, gleaming as if freshly washed and shined. Ash must be back from Canada. "Maybe he learned his lesson and will leave us alone," I said, as we rode away. Could I have been more wrong? Why did we go back to Dead Man's Butte? It was kind of on the way to New Mexico, and I wanted to see Moses so he could work on our little online store. We stayed with him for 2 days while I took pictures of the new merchandise, and Moses and I discussed pricing options. Moses and I had met at Comic-Con in San Diego a couple of years ago. Even though he was straight and married, and I was gay and single, we hit it off. He needed help with his online store. I was good with computers and finances. We became partners. His family became employees, and the rest is history. Moses knew all about my family and the friction between me and my parents. We often spent late nights talking over the phone about life while I worked on the website and he worked on inventory. My mega-rich parents resented me because I was the accident that impinged on their freedom and finances. They didn't like me, always shuffling me off to some boarding school or some nanny or some random member of the staff, usually Karen, who became something like an unofficial aunt. Why had my parents kept my extended family from me? Why had they avoided all these people? A reply to the Facebook message waited for me, and it came from Aunt Maggie, the youngest child. She'd have to be 45 or 50 or something. Nerves hit, as did a pinch of dread. I looked away from the laptop, suddenly afraid of what it would say. Why would they want to see me? What had Dad done 10 years ago? Why had he left? Did I really want to know? Scroll down, Derrik said. I'll read it to you. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. Why did something so simple terrify me? Rodney, Derrik read, I can't believe it. You don't know how long we've been waiting to hear from you. I'm your Aunt Maggie, and you are just in time. This Saturday, we are having a wedding and reception at the old place. My daughter, your cousin Cindy, is marrying a nice young man named Kyle. This was the only weekend we could all get together, and we'd love to have you and Derrik. Come and meet everybody, but it's better if you get here before 6. That's when the wedding is. Here's my email. Send me yours, and I'll send you my contact information. Everybody will be so surprised. And don't worry about food. We always make leftovers. Tell me your favorite foods, and maybe we can make them. Call me. Love, Maggie. Tell her we love chimichangas, Derrik said. Can they make cheese and onion chimichangas? I replied, kissing him. I sent the email and a picture of me and Derrik standing next to the Kawasaki. By the way, Moses' kids had to try on our leather jackets and take selfies in them. They begged Moses for their own, but he only smiled and said, we'll see what Santa brings. After Dead Man's Butte, we went to Las Vegas. Derrik sent his folks a postcard, and from there we took the highway to Flagstaff, Arizona, where we relaxed for a day, and Derrik sent yet another postcard. Maggie had called while we drove. I called her back that night, and she picked up on the first ring. Rodney, it's great to hear from you, she said. Chimichangas are now on the menu. I told everybody you were coming, and they were excited. Now you don't need to worry about bringing anything. Just show up. Hope you drink, because we have literally a ton of Dos Equis, and lemonade or Coca-Cola for those who don't. I placed the phone on speaker and said, This is Derrik, my fiancé. Hi, Maggie. Won't you be really busy because of the wedding? He asked. Are you kidding? I'll be a nervous wreck, she said. I'm sure I'll need a break. Is there anything we can bring? I asked. Let me interrupt, because Rodney needs to know what he's in for, Derrik said. What happened with his dad 10 years ago? Maggie's tone darkened a little, and she said, I think it best we talk about it when you get here. Just know you both are welcomed and loved, and we don't hold what happened against you, Rodney. Admittedly, your grandfather could have handled things different, but ultimately, it's Arthur who was the jerk. We talked for 15 minutes or so. Now that I had an address, I let the phone guide us to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Derrik sent a postcard. Turns out it was the last time he sent one. Moses had emailed me about a lot of new merchandise, and a new interstate tax program was about to go into effect. It took me all day to make the changes. Derrik helped. When we ate dinner, I asked, How many postcards have you sent? Derrik grinned and answered, 20 or so. I want to rub it in their faces that I'm free and can go wherever I want, do whatever I want, and most importantly, love whoever I want. So I'm a game piece in this little war with your parents, I asked. Are you using me? Not yet, but I'm about to, he whispered directly into my ear and running a finger down the center of my chest. You are the sexiest game piece on the planet, he whispered. Does that line always work? I whispered. You drive me crazy, he whispered, this time lightly biting my earlobe. You are the man I love, the man I want to be with, the man I didn't let him talk anymore. I whipped his shirt over his head and, oh boy, our kiss was, wow. That night, oh my God, that night was even more so. Enough to make me do a little research on my phone. Well, Derrik slept. I can't believe I'm really about to do this. That morning, I held him, and all I could think was, I'm the most blessed man in the world. I loved Derrik even more. I cuddled him close, suddenly happy beyond anything I've ever felt. When he woke, he blinked and smiled. I asked him, we've only known each other for a few weeks, and I've been thinking. I'm happy when I'm with you, and I did some checking. There is a county clerk's office up in Santa Fe that is on our way. What say we go in and get a marriage license, or at least see what it would take? Derrik's wicked smile delighted me. It was some time later, more like lunch, as we ate a very late breakfast at some little diner just outside Albuquerque, reminiscing about last night, when my phone rang. The caller ID said, Dad. My stomach tightened, and my mood soured. I swallowed once before answering. Where are you? He demanded. His voice sounded hollow, and the connection had a light mechanical hum in the background. He must be calling from a plane. Albuquerque, I said, munching on some toast. I tried not to sound annoyed, but I couldn't help myself. The diner smelled of bacon and coffee. Dad's voice grew louder. Just as I feared. Is Derrik with you? Right next to me. Let me put my phone on speaker and you can yell at both of us, I said, setting the phone on speaker and placing it between me and Derrik. Hi, Mr. Tollum, Derrik said. We're sitting down and eating pancakes. Scream away all you want, but I'll have you know that everybody in the crowded diner will hear you. Your yelling doesn't bother us, Father, the all-self-important governor candidate who is the answer to all the problems in the world, I said. That made him pause before he said, Are you going to Taos? I hadn't spoken to my parents since that day they wouldn't allow Derrik to stay. How did Dad know where we were going? I simply said, As if you care. Derrik chimed in. We wanted to stop by the old town here in Albuquerque first, and then take the Turquoise Trail Scenic Byway and have dinner and spend the night in Santa Fe. But we should arrive in Taos sometime tomorrow. And then we are going to a wedding, I said. Aunt Maggie invited us. Without even waiting for me to finish, Dad yelled, I forbid you. Derrik looked at me and took a bite of pancakes. I poured more maple syrup on my pancakes and then took a bite. Did you hear me? Dad yelled again. I forbid you from seeing those people. Why? I said back, the anger bubbling to the surface. Honey, Mom broke in, their phone must be on speaker as well. You need to listen to us. Both your dad and I and Derrik's parents have been talking, and none of us want you two to marry. I want you to come home, alone, and we'll patch things up. A lot has happened, and we are willing to accept that you are gay. Derrik's parents are willing to forgive him for running off with you. That's generous of all of you, Derrik said, his voice thick with sarcasm. You and Rodney, well, it's just a little fling. Another woman said, You'll get over it. Mom, Derrik said, surprise and hurt in his eyes, what are you doing there? I called the Tollums and talked to them about all of this, Derrik's dad said. We drove down to Connecticut so we could solve this. What happened with Ash was a misunderstanding, and in a way, it's your fault. My fault? Derrik asked, incredulous. You frustrated the poor guy. Did you know he's banned from Canada for the next 10 years and has to pay a massive fine? His mom said. The lunatic pulled a knife on us, I said. Your kick broke his hand, his dad countered. He's lucky Rodney didn't break anything else, Derrik said. You're lucky Sybil kept it out of the news, Mom said. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I love Derrik. We travel well together. We like similar things. We can talk for hours. I love him, I said quietly. Like I told you, I will protect Derrik from that scum. Suddenly Yash came on the phone. I am not scum. I'm far better than you. Derrick's voice rose almost to a shout. Will you guys ever butt out of our lives? It's why we left. Ash, after you grabbed me back in Nevada, it left a bruise, and it hurt. I will never live with you. And right now, Mom and Dad, I don't want to see you again. Don't contact me, ever. Rodney, let's go. His mom squeaked in surprise. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. We'd like to say this has been fun, Mom and Dad, but it hasn't. Goodbye. I ended the call, and we left the diner right after breakfast. From Albuquerque, we rode to Santa Fe, choosing the scenic turquoise trail over the I-25. The landscape was beautiful and hot, with sparse vegetation. We stopped at several small towns and made a serious pit stop at Santa Fe at a local convenience store. While I filled the tank and checked the bike, Derrik went inside to get his treats. He didn't bother buying postcards for his parents. We made a detour to the county clerk's office. Since it was a Friday, we had to wait 15 minutes before we saw the clerk. She asked us a couple of questions, checked our IDs and Derrick's passport, and within 30 minutes, we had a marriage license. I can't believe it. We both stared at the piece of paper, suddenly in shock. I folded it into a Japanese crane and placed it in my wallet. Origami, you say? A Japanese crane. Try being a bored kid locked away in a boarding school for most of your life. It's amazing the random things you learn to do. Our marriage license was only good in New Mexico, and only for 2 months. We left, smiling like devils. We wandered around the streets of Santa Fe until we found a nice Tex-Mex restaurant called Mari's. We splurged with 2 tomahawk steaks with a spicy lime garlic marinade, a jacket baked potato, and a side of bacon green beans. We chased it with 2 house brews, and for dessert we had a raspberry cheesecake. It was like we were married already. We found a motel in Santa Fe and stayed all night. Good thing we turned our phones off and put a do not disturb sign out. Our parents had tried texting or calling dozens of times during the night. Late the next morning, Derrik drove the Kawasaki the rest of the way to Taos. They tried calling again and again. I think Derrik and I both felt the same way about our parents. Disgusted. Of course, Derrick's parents tried to call him. We ignored them. At our next stop, both Derrik and I blocked them. Maybe they'd get the message to stop interfering in our lives. For every door that closes, another one opens. My phone led me directly to my grandparents' place, and we arrived Saturday, about 3:30 in the afternoon. Luckily, my grandparents hadn't moved, because I found the old house first try. It was an older, kind of sagging wood and brick house with several rooms added on, a second story I didn't remember, and it was all painted white. The cement porch, painted with an old gray paint, had a couple of rocking chairs with faded green pillows, and a 2-person patio swing which also had faded green pillows. The large windows had heavy, light blue drapes. It sat on an acre of land that had a couple of trees in the back and a couple of old cars resting to the side of the property. Old Christmas lights lined the eaves and edges of this 2-story house. Surrounded with overgrown flower beds filled with pink and white flowers and fragrant lavender and chamomile and towering weeds, The place needed a little bit of TLC. The air smelled of slow-cooked chili and a slower-cooked brisket grilling out back. The warm, yeasty aroma of fresh-baked bread made me take a deep breath. It smelled like the home I always wanted. Out front rested an old 3-tier bird fountain, gently shooting water into the air, and embedded about the flower beds and weeds were more than 24 statues of the Virgin Mary and various saints. Most I didn't recognize. A flowered cross hung on the front door. In the large open area out back, people I didn't recognize were setting up tables and chairs and a wedding arch that some middle-aged women were decorating with roses and white lights. Mom would never approve of this house, but to me, it seemed warm and inviting. "Something smells spicy," Derrik said, climbing off the bike and taking his helmet off. "I want to be adopted. Think we could get a cup of coffee?" His new haircut made him look so deliciously cute. I climbed off the Kawasaki as well, removed my helmet, and kissed him. We were interrupted by the squealing of children. Embarrassed, we turned to see the front door open, and a half-dozen kids ran out, followed by a heavier woman around 50. I recognized her. Aunt Maggie. She had olive skin, salt and pepper hair pulled into a bun, and she wore a red checkered apron stained with flour. "Aunt Maggie, I told you I heard a motorcycle," one of the boys said. "You must be Rodney," Maggie said, hurrying towards us. "You look just like your father at your age. And this must be the lucky man, Derrik." "Hello, Maggie. We just got our marriage certificate," I said, grinning the size of Texas. Beaming, she smothered me and Derrik in a huge hug, her laughter echoing a joyous. "Careful," a man said, exiting the house. He wore a priest's collar and a stained white apron. Maggie's been known to break ribs with one of her hugs. The kids laughed and Maggie let us go, still chuckling. "Father Bartholomew, you might be a priest, but you are still my brother. Careful, or I'll give you one of those hugs." Bartholomew raised his hands as in surrender, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. The aroma of baking bread wafted around the house, mingling with the laughter of all the children. He didn't look so much like Dad, except around the nose, but he did look older. Maybe being a priest ages you faster. Derrik, also grinning, blurted out, "You're a priest. Can you marry us?" I admired Derrik's optimism, though I knew the answer already. The Catholic Church's stance on same-sex unions hadn't changed. My uncle diplomatically said, "Sorry, boys, I'm not registered in New Mexico. Your best bet is to find a judge." "I need a break before I strangle somebody. Let me introduce you to everybody, at least everybody who's here," Maggie said, and she led us around the house, introducing us to more people than I could ever remember. However, an elderly couple and a very elderly woman sat out back in the shade of the house. Though they were older than I remembered, I recognized them. My grandparents and my great-grandma. "They must be in their 80s, Derrik whispered, "and your great-grandma must have passed 100. "She'll be 102 on her next birthday," Maggie said. "The family picture on Facebook was her 100th birthday party." "You should have seen the cake," Grandma said. Grandpa weakly coughed a little, but his grip was surprisingly firm as he held his hand out to me. "Come here, Arthur. It's been too long. Good Lord, you've gotten tall." "It's Rodney, sir. I'm Arthur's son," I said. "And who is this handsome man with you?" Grandma said, looking slightly confused. "I told you about him," Maggie whispered. "Don't you remember?" I took Grandpa's hand again, unsure of how we'd take the news that I was marrying a man. Were these people as opinionated as my parents? I dove in and said, "This is Derrik, my fiancé." Great-grandma cackled and said, "I love me a good wedding. Tell me about the cake. I love a good cake. Do they make red velvet wedding cakes? They should. That's my favorite. And chocolate frosting, and those little candy things. Why, I remember my wedding cake. White and gold, and it had little pearls you could eat. We froze the top and ate it on our first anniversary." "It's ironic," Maggie said. "Great-grandma still has a mind as sharp as a tack, but your grandpa is lost in the past." She took us around and introduced us to the rest of the crowd. And I finally asked, "What happened 10 years ago? Why won't my parents tell me about it?" Maggie took us to a quieter area inside and we sat down. "It actually started a long time ago," she began. "Arthur and Bartholomew were only a year apart and grew up annoyed with each other. They fought all the time. Bartholomew got married to his high school sweetheart, had one son, and was happy. Then his wife fought cancer and lost. She passed away. He went through some hard times and felt the need to become a priest. Even though he met all the requirements and had a partial scholarship from the parish, he couldn't afford getting a bachelor's and master's in theology. Did you realize that becoming a priest can cost over $200,000? "It's just as expensive as any other degree," Derrik said. "I didn't know," I said, feeling a pang of sympathy for my uncle. "Mom and Dad used all their savings and even mortgaged the house to help pay for it," Maggie said. "How does this fit in with my dad?" I said, trying to piece it together. "There was no inheritance anymore," Maggie said. "Your dad wanted to use his inheritance to jumpstart his brokerage and use the family house as collateral for a loan. Even surprised everybody because he had all the papers ready. It only took one signature from your grandpa, and it was a go. Grandpa said no. He wasn't going to risk the family home. They got into a fight. I felt a mix of shock and betrayal for my dad. Grandpa's decision must have felt like a betrayal to my dad." "What did the rest of you think?" Derrik asked. Maggie shrugged and said, "Do you know what an honor it is to have a priest in the family? We helped out as best we could. My brother graduated and eventually became a priest over in New Orleans. He comes home to visit once or twice a year. That brings us to 10 years ago." "All that was prologue?" Derrik asked. Maggie nodded and said in a softer tone, 10 years ago, the mortgage was paid off and your grandpa, he was about 70, I think, was getting ready to retire. They called a family meeting, and both Arthur and Bartholomew came. Since Bartholomew was now a priest, they wanted Arthur to take over the family business. Arthur wanted to sell it and the house and put your great-grandma, your grandma, and grandpa in a nursing home. He wanted the money to salvage his business. His reasoning was that since Bartholomew got the inheritance to become a priest, it was your father's turn to get the money. I guess he'd made some bad dealings and was about to lose his fancy brokerage." "I don't remember that," I said. "Not surprising. You were only 12, I think," Maggie said. "Anyway, your dad blamed Bartholomew for stealing the inheritance. This is where it gets bad. Grandma and Grandpa had a joint bank account which included their children. Because of everybody trying to help out Bartholomew and help out Grandma and Grandpa, their bank account had grown to $20,000. Your dad didn't like being told no, so what did he do? He took the $20,000 out of the account. Since it was a joint account, all we could do is try, and, according to the lawyer, solve it in court. It would come down to his word versus our word, and would get very expensive, very soon, which we couldn't afford. It wasn't worth it. Your dad won. We couldn't do anything except take his name off the account." Derrik placed an arm on my shoulders and asked, "Did Arthur ever pay it back?" Maggie slumped and said, "No, the family won't forgive him either." "No wonder we never visited," I said. An intense sadness swamped my emotions. Dad wasn't the person I thought he was. Why would these people want me around? The panic must have showed on my face, because Maggie moved over and sat next to me and said, "None of us blame you for what your father did. You were just a kid and didn't know what your parents were up to. We're glad you came home. You and Derrik are welcome here, any time." "Does Father Bartholomew resent us?" Derrik asked. A man came over and stood by Maggie. Father Bartholomew. He shook his head a little, and his smile was warm and genuine, and he said, "Not at all. Children should not be punished for the sins of their fathers. Then he added, "That's the problem with joint accounts. Any person on the account can take whatever is in there and get away with it." "But my parents are rich, aren't they?" I asked. Derrik took my hand and muttered, "They sure act like it." Maggie nodded and said, "They never told you that the stock market defeated them a few times." We talked a little longer, then Maggie and Father Bartholomew left. It was almost time for the wedding. We went out to the bike to make ourselves as presentable as we could, including leather jackets and tidying our hair. Ours wasn't the only bike that had arrived. A quick count brought the total to 14. A bunch of guys, who I later learned were cousins or aunts or uncles, stood around the bikes, shooting the breeze. Derrik and I joined them, and after introductions became immediate members of the family. Since we all rode bikes, it gave us something in common. We talked about roads, about diners, about the different states we had all visited. A couple people had never left New Mexico. We passed around our phones, showing pictures of all the places we'd all been to, and then we all talked about places we wanted to go. Surprise, nobody here had been to Maine. Most people at the wedding wore their Sunday best or evening attire, except most of us bikers. Several wore denim vests with a lot of patches on them, or leather jackets, and one 19-year-old rode a green Ninja with a matching leather jacket. Derrik and I joined them at the back of the wedding. All the wedding flowers sparkled with white lights, and the aroma of the barbecue's grilling steaks and chicken filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of the wedding flowers. Derrik took my hand and softly said, "It smells like the steakhouse we met in." I let go of his hand and placed my arm around his shoulders, feeling a happiness I had never known before. The procession started as soon as we all took our seats. The bride, Cindy, was beautiful in her all-white dress with a pink and white rose bouquet, but she was also 6 months pregnant. The groom wore a black tux with a pink tie and corsage. He had the jitters and couldn't stop smiling. The man who officiated started out by saying, "I'm Judge Emerson Fairfax, and it is my pleasure to be here today." Does anybody ever remember the words at a wedding? Only the emotions, only the happiness, only the joy. "Someday, that will be us," Derrik said, and lightly kissed me on the cheek. The brief ceremony lasted only 20 minutes. At the end, we all cheered, but the bride turned around and hushed us up. Her words surprised me. My mom, most of you know her as Maggie, told me about something miraculous. My cousin Rodney is here. We all thought his dad kept him chained up in the basement, locked away for all time. We haven't seen him for a decade. He made it. The crowd cheered, and some who knew us slapped us on the back. Somebody yelled, "You'll have to tell me how you escaped." "I bought my Kawasaki and rode into the sunset," I yelled. "Rodney met me in Nevada," Derrik also yelled. One of the bikers shouted, "The kids get around. Let's toast freedom." How did so many people have their beers already? My huge extended family were not rich. Didn't know us, but they toasted us and cheered for us. Something ached in my heart. For the first time, maybe the only time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. "We won't go into family politics," Cindy continued. "Not on a night of love. Rodney and his fiancée, Derrik, just got a marriage license and are trying to figure out what to do. Kyle and I don't mind sharing our wedding. Rodney, Derrik, do you want to use that marriage license right now? We have a judge up here and enough food to feed the entire city. Come on up." This was happening too fast. Derrik and I held hands, and the next thing we knew, people were leading us under the beautiful wedding arch with its sweet-scented roses and twinkling lights, and before a smiling judge. The first thing he said was, "Let me see your marriage license." I pulled out my wallet and handed him the folded origami crane that was our marriage license. This must be a dream because I was so happy. Derrik gave me a shy grin, his eyes sparkling with happiness. Some emotion exploded in my chest. I loved him so much. "It's all in order. "You might not believe this," the judge said, "but this is the first time I've ever seen a wedding license folded this much. Somebody didn't want to lose this." The crowd chuckled. "You have the rings?" he said, beaming. "Within minutes," he said. "I now pronounce you husband and husband. You may kiss your husband." I stared at Derrik, my heart overflowing with happiness as tears spilled down my cheeks. Derrik's face glistened with his own tears. The entire crowd cheered and clapped and shouted, blending into a symphony of joy. Even the bride and groom joined in. We leaned in together. But before we could kiss, a woman's voice pierced the air, screaming, "Stop!" It was as if somebody had dropped an anvil, killing the party. The entire landscape of people became graveyard quiet. As one, we all looked at the intruders. My dad, my mom, Derrik's dad, and mom, and Derrik's ex-boyfriend, Ash. The old darkness began to cloud my mind and fill me with the depression I had fought off long ago. Derrik wiped the tears from his face, looking as desolate as I felt. It was Derrik's mom who had screamed, and in a slightly milder tone she said, "We're here to bring our boy home and see he marries a proper man, not some homeless drifter who will throw him away the instant he tires of him." "Mother," Derrik yelled, "why do you have to ruin my life? I hate you, I hate Dad, and especially I hate Ash." Fighting past the impending depression, I found anger. I balled my fists and gave my parents the most hateful look I could, as I said, "You never cared about me, only yourselves, only your money. You locked me away in boarding schools, or distant summer camps, or with random members of staff, all so you could avoid me. Now you're here pretending to give a damn. You're nothing but hypocrites." As loud as I got, it wasn't as loud as Cindy could get. Anger reddened her face, and her voice became hysterical as she screamed, "How dare you ruin my wedding? What gives you the right to barge in?" "They are our children," my dad said. "Come home, baby," Ash said. "I will forgive you for running away." Seeing the cast on his arm made me smile. I guess I had broken his hand when I kicked it. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You travel thousands of miles to prevent us from getting married? Why, so you can parade your gay son to your voters and show them that you are loving parents?" Grandpa stood up and squinted at the back. "Arthur, is that you? You stole all that money from me, and you have the gall to come back?" "Don't get excited, dear. You know what the doctor said about your heart," Grandma said. The place exploded in shouting. I looked at Cindy, a strange horror filling my breast, and said, "I'm sorry about my parents. We didn't know they were coming." Cindy looked at me with sympathy in her eyes and said, "It wouldn't be a family wedding without a fight. Don't worry about it." The judge tugged at my arm and said, "Rodney, sign here." He held the much wrinkled married application and a pen. I signed it. "Derrik," he said. Derrik looked at the paper, at my signature, and quickly signed the paper. He took the paper to the bride and groom, and they signed it as witnesses. Last of all, the judge signed the paper, folded it in half, and put it in his shirt pocket. Something like wonder replaced every single emotion I had been feeling. The sudden chaos still flooded the entire wedding, except around us and Cindy, Kyle, and the judge. He only nodded, a smile in his eyes. Nobody else in the wedding had noticed what had just happened. "As soon as you two kiss, you're married," the judge said. Cindy giggled and said, "Best day ever, cousin." And the chaos around us continued. Unexpectedly, a clear voice rang out, a voice that demanded obedience. Judge Emerson Fairfax. "Quiet, people. Let's get ourselves under control." And the judge gestured for silence. He stood between me and Cindy, with Derrik at my side and Kyle at Cindy's. Derrik and I held hands, and our smiles peeked out. I was becoming happier by the second. Maggie shouted something, and though the place didn't become quiet, at least we could hear. "Mr. Tollum, I assume you are Rodney's dad," the judge said. "His mother is here too," Dad said. "That makes you Derrik's parents?" the judge said to the other people. "Yes," his mother said, an innocent expression on her face. "And I am the man Derrik's promised to marry," Ash boasted. "I see," the judge said. "Father Bartholomew, as a priest, you are required to tell the truth, correct?" "Yes, sir," Uncle Bartholomew said. "Answer me this, then," the judge said. "Here in America, what is the age of accountability?" 18 for legal purposes, 21 for drinking, he said. "I see," the judge said again. "You wouldn't happen to know the legal age in Canada, would you?" "Generally," Uncle Bartholomew said, "it's 19, 21 for drinking." "Interesting," the judge said, his eyes twinkling. "I assume that neither man requires parental permission to get remarried?" "Yes, Your Honor," Father Bartholomew said. "You can't mean that," Derrik's mom yelled. The judge gave her his courtroom stare, his eyes granite hard, and said, "Ma'am, I would watch what you say before you destroy your family." "That Rodney biker man has already destroyed it and stolen my son," she yelled. "How a renegade degenerate can come from such nice parents is a mystery to even God." Derrik's dad chimed in. "What kind of a low-life scum lives off the back of a motorcycle? I don't want that life for my boy." "So you're a renegade degenerate low-life scum," Derrik said, a wicked grin playing across his face. "I knew there was a reason I loved you." "Derrik, how old are you?" the judge asked. 21. "And you, Rodney?" 22. I immediately grew afraid of what might happen. Could our family split me and Derrik apart? If I didn't do as they said, would they destroy the love I felt for Derrik? "Derrik needs to go back home, and Rodney, you are coming with us back to Connecticut." Dad's voice grew louder and louder. I looked out at all the guests, and I saw a lot of angry looks. Not aimed at me, but at my dad. Did they agree with him? I lived life on the road, roaming from place to place, with no real home to go to, except here. Once again, my parents would destroy my life as they pursued theirs. They would annul my marriage and, what had Cindy said, lock me away. I had to be free to be me. His parents would take Derrik away, and my parents would force me home. They would make sure Derrik married Ash, no matter how Derrik felt. We were both trapped by our parents. "Seems to me," the judge said, "that your parents stopped having any say in the matter when you two came of age." "That's not true," my mom said. "Rodney will do as he's told." "No, Mom," I said. "I'm leaving with my husband. Go back to Connecticut and pretend you're wealthy. This is my home. If Aunt Maggie will let us visit every so often." At that moment, Maggie stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Arthur, how dare you come here and try to tear apart a family celebration with your selfish demands," she said, her voice steady and firm. "Rodney and Derrik are happy together, and we won't let you destroy that." Father Bartholomew joined her, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. "This is a time for love and acceptance, not hatred and division," he said. "If you truly care about your sons, you should support their happiness." The crowd murmured in agreement, and I felt a surge of support from my family and my new friends. Derrik's grip tightened on my hand, and I knew we had the strength to face this together. Cindy and Kyle stepped beside us, as if to protect us. The bikers surrounded us as well. My family, my true family, had my back. Derrik's mom faltered, her anger wavering as she looked around at the united front against her. But, he's our son," she stammered. "And he's found someone who loves him," Maggie said gently. Isn't that what you should want for him? Ash, realizing he had no allies here, took a step back. Maybe I was wrong, he mumbled. My dad looked conflicted, but my mom and Derrik's dad remained stubborn. Please, I said, my voice breaking, let us be happy. There was a long, tense moment of silence. Then finally, my dad sighed and nodded. All right, he said. If this is what you truly want, Rodney, we'll step back. Derrik's mom nodded reluctantly. I just want you to be happy, she said, her voice trembling. With that, the tension began to lift. The crowd cheered again, and Cindy, who had been fuming, broke into a smile. Now let's get back to celebrating love, she declared. Derrik and I shared a tearful, joyful kiss under the twinkling wedding arch, surrounded by the cheers and applause of our family and friends. This night was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. We knew that we had overcome a great challenge, but it only made our love and commitment to each other stronger. I kissed Derrik again. Wow, he said. Epilogue. The lively music demanded we dance. Derrik and I joined many others on their impromptu dance floor. True to her word, Maggie had made deep-fried, shredded beef chimichangas. On a break, Derrik and I filled our plates with chimichangas, topped with a guacamole made with avocado and sour cream, and sprinkled with a little cotija cheese. To that we added refried beans and a salad made of roasted corn, roasted red pepper, and a roasted sweet onion mixed with a spicy avocado and jalapeno yogurt sauce. There was plenty of Dos Equis to go around. Derrik and I took our food and relaxed on the porch swing, giving us an excellent view of my Kawasaki and the bubbling sounds of the fountain. Dad, Mom, and Father Bartholomew had disappeared into some other room to talk. Only time will tell if they solve their problems. Derrik's mom and dad sat at one of the tables, enjoying the beer. Cindy and Kyle slow danced for a bit, then disappeared. Ash flirted with one of my older cousins. I sure had a lot of cousins. All was at peace. Aunt Maggie brought us each a slice of wedding cake. We had no wedding presents, had only the highway to call home, and a Kawasaki to show us the world. I had never been so happy. By the dreamy look in Derrik's eyes, he felt the same. Derrik leaned on my shoulder and said, "Where to next, husband?" The end. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm Gio, and I appreciate your love and support. Thank you so much. I can't promise when the next story will be out, just as soon as I am done writing it. Thank you for everything, my friends. Peace.